My grandma called on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after my sister's surprise birthday party. The one my parents threw for 200 people and forgot to invite me to. Her voice was the same voice she always used when she wanted something done without fuss. "Come see me," she said. "Saturday, alone, and don't you say a word to your mother." I was holding a cat in my left arm, a calico with an ear infection who didn't like being held. I didn't drop her, but I did sit down on the exam room floor, right there on the cold tile, and I said, "Okay, Grandma, welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. If you're new here, we share real-feeling family stories about the moments that test your patience, your boundaries, and your heart. Drop a comment if you've ever felt invisible at your own family's table." My grandma Edith had hands that smelled like flour and wrote numbers smaller than anyone I've ever met. She was an accountant for a lumber company in upstate New York for 31 years, and even after she retired, she kept a ledger in the kitchen drawer where she tracked every grocery bill, every utility payment, every birthday card she sent, and what it cost to mail it. She taught me to count coins when I was 6. Quarters first, then dimes, then nickels. Pennies last, because pennies, she said, were the ones people threw away, and that told you something about the people. My mother Diane had a different kind of system. Hers was a system of attention, and the math was simple. My sister Brooke got most of it, and I got what was left over. Brooke was 4 years younger than me, and she had the kind of needs that filled a room. She cried louder, wanted more, asked for things in a voice that made adults lean in. I was the opposite. I fixed my own lunches by age 10. I signed my own permission slips. By the time I was 14, my parents had started calling me independent, and they said it the way people say low maintenance about a car they don't plan to wash. I don't blame my mother entirely. She was a school secretary with 2 daughters and a husband who worked long hours at the bank. She triaged. Brooke was the squeaky wheel. I was the one who rolled quietly in the right direction without being pushed. But my grandma noticed. She noticed the way a woman who'd spent 40 years reading columns of figures would notice a number that didn't belong. She saw me at Thanksgiving sitting at the end of the table while Brooke told stories from the center. She saw me at graduation standing 2 steps behind the family photo because nobody waved me forward. She saw me, and she wrote it down somewhere. Not in her ledger, not then, but in her memory, which was sharper than any paper. She once told me, sitting on her porch with a plate of lemon cookies between us, that every family has a ledger. "You just have to know where they keep it," she said. I thought she was talking about groceries. She was not. Let me give you the math on my childhood, since math is the language my grandmother taught me to trust. My high school graduation, my mother took 4 photographs. I counted because the camera flash left spots in my vision, and I had nothing else to count while I waited for someone to say something proud. My father arrived 20 minutes late, sat in the back row, and left before the reception because he had a conference call. He managed a branch of a community bank, and he managed it the way he managed our family, with an eye on the account that mattered most to him. Brooke's high school graduation 4 years later, my parents hired a photographer, professional, digital, 312 images on a shared album I found by accident. They booked a restaurant for 60 people. I was invited to that one. I sat between my Aunt Marge and a cousin I hadn't seen since I was 11, and I clapped when they gave the toast, and I drove home alone while the rest of the family went out for ice cream. When I applied for the veterinary technician program at the community college, I needed my father's signature on a financial form. He said he'd handle it. He forgot. I filed it late, lost the early enrollment discount, and paid the difference myself with money I'd saved from a summer job at a feed store. When Brooke wanted to attend a summer art intensive 2 states away, my father drove 6 hours each way to drop her off, waited in the parking lot until she was settled, and called her every night for 3 weeks. I didn't keep score. Or maybe I did. But I kept the scorecard in a drawer I told myself I'd never open, the same way my grandmother kept certain receipts in folders she didn't label. The morning of Brooke's surprise birthday party, the one that changed everything, I found out about it the way most people find out about things they weren't meant to know. Somebody posted an Instagram story. A cousin, I think. Balloons in the backyard. A banner with Brooke's name in gold letters. 200 people in the frame, and not one of them was me. I stood in my kitchen and looked at that Instagram story for a long time. The lighting was good. Somebody had strung those paper lanterns you see at outdoor weddings, the kind that glow warm orange when the sun goes down. There was a table with a cake shaped like a painter's palette, because Brooke was a graphic designer, and everyone in my family knew that about her. There was a charcuterie board that must have cost $100. There were faces I recognized. My parents' neighbors, my mother's co-workers from the school district, cousins from both sides, a few of Brooke's college friends I'd met once at a Thanksgiving that ran too long. 200 people. And nobody called me. I could have done a lot of things that evening. I could have called my mother and asked why. I could have sent a text that started with, "Did you forget?" and ended with something I'd regret. But I didn't. I drove to the drugstore on Route 12, the one with the greeting card aisle between the Band-Aids and the toothpaste, and I bought a birthday card for my sister. I wrote it standing at the pharmacy counter, with a pen that skipped on every third word. I told Brooke happy birthday. I told her I remembered the time she was 5 and got bubblegum stuck in her hair, and I sat on the bathroom floor and cut it out with kitchen scissors while she cried. I told her I was proud of her design work. I signed it, Love, Adeline. I sealed the envelope and bought a set of professional drawing pens. The kind with the fine-tip nibs that cost more than I usually spend on myself. Because Brooke was a graphic designer, and I thought she could use them. I mailed it the next morning. My mother called 2 days later. "That was sweet of you, honey. You know how it is. We just ran out of space." Through the phone, I could hear music. Leftover party playlist, maybe, or the TV. Something with a beat that didn't match the conversation. 200 people. And they ran out of space. I said, "I'm glad she liked the card, Mom." I hung up. I went back to work. There was a tabby with a broken leg waiting for me, and broken legs. At least, I knew how to fix. 3 weeks passed. 21 days of feed the cats, drive to clinic, clean the kennels, drive home, read a chapter, sleep. The rhythm of a life nobody interrupts because nobody thinks to. Then my phone buzzed on the stainless steel counter in exam room 2, and the name on the screen was Grandma Edith. That was unusual. My grandmother and I talked, but we talked through layers. She'd tell my Aunt Marge something, and Marge would mention it to my mother, and my mother would relay it to me 3 days late with half the details missing. Or Brooke would visit Grandma on a Sunday and text me afterward. "Grandma says hi. She made cookies." Direct calls from Edith were rare. Maybe twice a year, Christmas and my birthday, and even those had gotten shorter since she turned 85. This was a Wednesday in October. Not Christmas, not my birthday, not anything. I answered with the calico in my left arm. Her name was Peaches, and she was someone's cat who'd come in with an ear infection so bad she'd been shaking her head for a week. Peaches did not like phones, or people, or being held. "Come see me," my grandmother said. No greeting, no how are you. Just the instruction, clean and flat, like she was reading a line item from a balance sheet. "Saturday, alone. And don't you say a word to your mother." 47 seconds. I timed it later, checking my call log because that's the kind of person I am. The kind who checks. The kind who counts. I called her back after I put Peaches in her carrier. She didn't answer. I texted, "Everything okay?" She replied 11 minutes later in the way she always replied, complete sentences, proper punctuation. "Saturday, 10 a.m., bring nothing." I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was October, and the air had that first frost bite to it. I tried to talk myself into rational explanations. Maybe she wanted to give me a quilt. Maybe she had a doctor's appointment she needed a ride to. Maybe she just wanted company. But my grandmother didn't say, "Don't tell your mother about quilts." She didn't say it about doctor's appointments. She said it about things that mattered, and things that mattered, in my grandmother's world, always had a number attached. I baked a batch of lemon cookies that Friday night. Her recipe. the one with the extra zest, and drove to her house the next morning with the cookies in a tin and a feeling in my chest like the moment before a vet opens a test result she already knows won't be good. My grandmother's house was a small clapboard cottage on Birch Lane, painted white every 4 years by whoever in the family she could talk into holding a brush. There was lavender growing along the front steps. She'd planted it the year my grandfather died, and it came back every spring thicker than before, like it was making a point. She was on the porch when I pulled up. Rocking chair, sweater buttoned to the neck even though the morning was mild. On her lap, a manila envelope, thick, with a clasp, the kind you buy at office supply stores, not the kind that comes in the mail. "You brought cookies," she said. "You told me to bring nothing." "I know what I said. Give me a cookie." I handed her one through the screen door, and she bit into it with the careful precision of a woman who'd had the same dentist for 30 years. Then she nodded toward the hallway. "Come inside, back bedroom." The bedroom smelled like lavender sachets and old wool. The bed was made tight, military corners. My grandfather had served in Korea, and Edith had kept his habit alive long after he stopped making beds himself. On top of the white quilt, arranged in a row like evidence at a hearing, were 3 manila folders, each one labeled in her handwriting. Small, neat, blue ink. She sat on the edge of the bed and patted the space beside her. I sat. "Your grandfather loved you," she said. Not past tense the way people talk about dead people at funerals. Present tense, active, like he was still in the next room, listening. "I know, Grandma. He loved you more than he loved anyone in this family, and he wasn't quiet about it." She paused. "He left you something. Your father changed it." I didn't move. "I have proof," she said. And she picked up the envelope from the bed. The thick one. The one that had been sitting on her lap when I arrived. And her hands were steady. The hands of a woman who'd balanced 40 years of columns and never lost a cent. Mine were not. She opened the clasp and pulled out 2 documents. Both were photocopies, but the quality was sharp. My grandmother owned a printer she maintained the way some people maintain cars, and she'd made these copies herself. "This one," she said, placing the first sheet on the quilt between us, "is the will your grandfather wrote with Martin Calloway in 2012, 2 years before he died." I knew Martin. He was my grandfather's fishing buddy, a probate lawyer who'd retired to a converted garage on the other side of town. He'd been at the funeral. He'd worn a tie that was too short and cried in the parking lot. "This one," she said, placing the second document next to the first, "is the will your father filed with the county after your grandfather passed. It was prepared by a different attorney. Your grandfather never saw it." I picked up the first one. My grandfather's handwriting was in the margin. Shaky, but legible. The penmanship of a man who'd farmed his whole life and held a pen the way he held a wrench. In blue ink, next to the section on asset distribution, he'd written, "For Adeline, who never asks for anything. The original will left 70% of his estate to me. The house, the 47 acres of farmland east of Route 9, the savings account at the credit union, $142,000 he'd built up over 60 years of growing timber and raising soybeans. 20% went to my father, 10% to a trust fund for future grandchildren. The second will, the one my father filed, split things differently. 50% to Glenn Sutton, 30% to Brooke Sutton, 20% to Adeline Sutton, held in trust and managed by Glenn Sutton. I'd never received a cent, not a quarterly statement, not a phone call from a trustee, nothing. I read both documents 3 times. I'm a veterinary technician. I read lab panels for a living. I know how to compare 2 sets of numbers and find the one that doesn't match. "Does Dad know you have this?" I asked. My grandmother looked at me the way she used to look at a column of numbers that didn't add up. Patient, precise, already 3 steps ahead. "Not yet," she said. She wasn't done. My grandmother had never been the kind of woman who presented half a case. She opened the first folder. Inside, bank statements. The credit union account my grandfather had left. The one with $142,000 in it. She'd highlighted the withdrawals in yellow marker. One by one, Starting 3 months after Harold's death, the balance dropped. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. A lump sum of 22,000 in March of 2015. By September of that year, the account was empty. Every withdrawal bore one signature: Glenn Sutton. The second folder, a stack of printed emails between my father and a financial advisor I'd never heard of. The subject lines were clinical: restructuring trust assets, portfolio rebalancing Q3, liquidation timeline. The content was not clinical. My father had taken the money that was supposed to be mine and poured it into a commercial real estate development that went bankrupt 18 months later. The emails documented the loss in language so careful it almost sounded calm. The third folder, a property deed. My grandfather's 47 acres east of Route 9, the land where I used to pick blackberries along the fence line in August, had been sold in 2017. Sale price: $198,000. The proceeds went to a personal account under my father's name. No notification to any other family member. No mention in any family conversation. Ever. I looked at my grandmother. She was sitting straight, both feet flat on the floor, hands folded on the quilt. She'd organized this the way she organized everything: by category, by date, by consequence. I found the bank discrepancy in 2016, she said. 2 years after your grandfather died. I was going through old statements. I still had copies from when I managed the household books. The numbers didn't match, so I kept looking. Why didn't you say something then? I'd had a stroke, sweetheart. 2 months after your grandfather's funeral. I couldn't drive. I couldn't dress myself some mornings. Your father was the one who took me to physical therapy. She paused. You don't accuse the person carrying you down the stairs. And now? Now I can dress myself. Now I can carry my own papers. And now? She looked at me, and her eyes were dry and clear. They threw a party for 200 people and didn't invite you, and you still sent a card. That card, the one I'd written on the pharmacy counter with a pen that skipped. That was the thing that made my 87-year-old grandmother decide it was time. I drove home with the folders on the passenger seat and the lemon cookie tin wedged behind the headrest so it wouldn't slide. The October sun was low and orange through the windshield, the kind of light that makes everything look like a photograph someone took on purpose. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I drove 20 minutes in silence, parked in my driveway, and sat in the car with the engine off until one of my cats, Roscoe, the gray one, appeared in the kitchen window and meowed at me through the glass. Inside, I spread the papers across the kitchen table. Roscoe sat on one corner of the stack. Clementine, the orange tabby, sat on the other. Neither of them understood estate law, but they were warm, and they were there, which put them ahead of most of my family. I read everything again. Then I opened a notebook, the kind with the graph paper pages I use for tracking patient weights at the clinic, and I made a list. Not of what I felt, of what I knew. When you're a vet tech, you learn to separate the diagnosis from the emotion. A dog comes in limping, and the owner is crying, and the dog is scared, and the room smells like antiseptic and fear. You don't cry. You read the X-ray. You check the margins. You identify the fracture. Then you make a plan. My family had a fracture. It had been there for 12 years, hidden under a cast nobody told me about. I listed my options. Confront my father directly. He'd deny it. Hire a lawyer. I had $800 in savings and a vet tech's salary. Go to the next family dinner and put the documents on the table. Satisfying, but chaotic, and chaos benefits the person with the most to hide. At the bottom of the third folder, my grandmother had paper-clipped a note. One line, written on the back of a receipt from the bakery where she bought lemon filling. Call Martin Calloway. He wrote the original. He'll know what to do. And beneath that, a phone number in her neat blue ink. I picked up my phone. Not to call my father. Not to call my mother. I called the number my grandmother had written on the back of a lemon cookie receipt. Martin Calloway's office was a single-car garage that he'd insulated with plywood and carpet remnants in 1998. There was a desk, a filing cabinet, a lamp with a green glass shade, and a framed photo of him and my grandfather holding a walleye the size of a toddler. The walleye was bigger than the frame. He was 68. Retired, technically. But retirement for Martin meant he stopped billing and started picking his clients based on whether he liked them. He liked my grandmother. He'd liked my grandfather more. "Sit," he said when I walked in. He didn't offer coffee. He looked at the folders I was carrying and said, "Edith called me last week. She told me you'd be coming." Of course she had. I spread the papers on his desk. He put on reading glasses, the kind that sit low on the nose like a professor in a movie. And he read, not fast, not slow. The way a man reads when he already knows what he's looking for but wants to make sure it's as bad as he thinks. "I wrote this will," he said, tapping the original. "Harold came to me in the spring of 2012. Sat right there." He pointed at the chair I was sitting in. He said, "I want Adeline taken care of. She's the one who won't ask." Martin took off his glasses. The amended version, this one, didn't come through me. I never saw it. Glenn used someone in the city. Can we contest it? Statute of limitations starts when the beneficiary knew or should have known about the fraud. You were never notified of the amendment. You were 20 years old when Harold died, away at school, and Glenn was the sole executor. He paused. "The clock hasn't started, Adeline. You're still inside the window." He laid out the plan. He'd send a formal letter to my father, certified, return receipt requested, requesting an accounting of my grandfather's estate. Simultaneously, he'd invite the family to what he called a family estate review at his office. Not a courtroom, not a deposition. A table in a garage with a green lamp and a photograph of a walleye. "Bring everyone who has standing," he said. "Your father, your mother, your sister, your aunt. Anyone with a connection to Harold's estate." He signed the letter right there, at his garage desk, with a pen that had my grandfather's initials engraved on the barrel. He'd kept it for 12 years. Some people keep pens because they're expensive. Martin kept it because of who gave it to him. 5 days later, I was in the grooming bay at the clinic, bathing a golden retriever named Chief, who had rolled in something unspeakable, when my phone buzzed. The screen said, "Dad." My father hadn't called me in 4 months. Not since July, when he'd phoned to ask if I could pick up a prescription for my mother while she was at work. That was the kind of call I got. Logistical. Functional. The calls you make to people you trust to say yes without asking why. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was level. The voice he used at the bank when a loan application came back flagged. Controlled. But I could hear the effort in the control, the way you can hear a pipe humming right before the pressure gets too high. "As a family, this weekend." "Okay, Dad." I said it the same way I'd said, "Okay, Grandma," 3 weeks earlier. Same word. Same flat tone. Different everything. He hung up without saying goodbye. 30 minutes later, my mother called. "Honey, what's going on?" Her voice had that wispy quality it got when she was confused and trying not to sound scared. "Your father won't show me something. He's been in the study with the door closed for an hour. He was on the phone with someone I couldn't hear." "Ask Dad, Mom." "I'm asking you." "I know. But this one comes from him." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you all right?" I almost said yes automatically. That was the muscle memory. Yes. I'm fine. I'm always fine. I'm the one who doesn't need anything. But something had shifted. The folders on my kitchen table had rewritten the choreography. "I will be," I said. "Saturday. Martin Calloway's office. 10 a.m. Everyone." That evening, my father called again. 9:30 at night. I was on the couch with Roscoe on my chest and Clementine kneading the blanket near my feet. "Can we handle this privately?" he asked. "Just the two of us. Father and daughter. I can explain everything." "Martin's office, Saturday, 10 a.m. Everyone." He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I could hear the ice in his glass shift. A small sound. The sound of a man who was sitting in his study in the dark, drinking something he didn't want his wife to see. "Fine," he said, and he hung up. He didn't wait for Saturday. On Thursday evening, 2 days before the meeting, my father invited the whole family for dinner. Just the four of us, Glenn, Diane, Brooke, and me. He did not invite Grandma Edith, and I noticed that the way I noticed everything now, quietly, and with a number attached. My mother made pot roast. The dining room table had a tablecloth, which was unusual for a weeknight, and the good plates, which was unusual for a dinner that wasn't a holiday. My father was performing normalcy, and he wasn't bad at it. He waited until the plates were full and the bread was passed before he spoke. "There's been a misunderstanding about your grandfather's estate," he said. He was looking at me, not angry, not pleading, the look of a bank manager explaining a declined transaction. "I handled it years ago, and now someone is stirring things up." Diane looked between us. "What misunderstanding? What estate?" Brooke put her fork down. "Why are we talking about Grandpa's money? He's been dead for 12 years. Glenn kept his eyes on me. "Your grandmother is getting older, Adeline. She's confused. These papers she showed you, they're outdated. They don't reflect the final arrangements." I took a bite of pot roast, chewed, swallowed, took a sip of water. "Saturday," I said. "Martin's office. Bring whatever you'd like to bring." "Adeline, the pot roast is really good, Mom." My mother stared at me. My father stared at me. Brooke stared at her plate. Nobody moved for 6 full seconds, I counted. And then I stood up, carried my plate to the kitchen sink, rinsed it, and set it in the drying rack. "Thank you for dinner," I said from the doorway. "I'll see everyone Saturday." I drove home. The night was cold, the first real cold of fall, and the headlights caught frost on the shoulders of the road. I turned the heater on and thought about what my grandmother said about ledgers. My father had been keeping one too, a different kind, a ledger of omissions. What he didn't tell my mother, what he didn't tell me, what he didn't tell himself. I didn't finish my plate. Not because I wasn't hungry, because I'd learned something from my grandmother. You don't show your hand at the wrong table. My Aunt Marge called me Friday morning. Marge was my father's younger sister, 3 years younger, a retired dental hygienist, married to a man named Roy, who didn't say much but noticed everything. She lived 2 miles from Grandma Edith and checked on her 3 times a week. "Your father went to see your grandmother yesterday," Marge said. "No hello. The Sutton women, I was learning, opened conversations like accountants opened ledgers, straight to the number that mattered." "How long?" 2 hours. I was there when he arrived. He asked me to leave. I went to the kitchen and made tea. And when he came out, his face was the color of a stop sign, and he didn't look at me. Your grandmother was still in her rocking chair. She hadn't moved. She asked me if I wanted a lemon cookie. I could picture it. My grandmother in her chair, her posture straight, her sweater buttoned, her hands in her lap, and my father standing over her, trying to make a 90-year-old woman with 40 years of accounting experience believe she'd gotten her numbers wrong. What did he say to her? He told her she was confused, that the papers were old and didn't mean what she thought they meant. Marge paused. She told him she could recite every line item of that estate from memory. Then she asked him how much he lost on those development certificates in 2015. I closed my eyes. "He didn't answer that one," Marge added. "That evening, I called my grandmother. 'Are you okay?' 'I've been okay for 87 years, sweetheart. Your father isn't going to change that in one afternoon.' My mother called next. She sounded different, not confused anymore, rattled. 'Glenn says your grandmother needs a medical evaluation. He says she's showing signs of cognitive decline and he wants to schedule an appointment.' I said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, 'Mom, has Grandma ever, in your entire life, gotten a number wrong?' Silence. Diane was a school secretary. She'd watched Edith balance Christmas budgets and church fundraiser books and property taxes for 3 decades without a single error. 'No,' my mother said quietly. 'Then maybe ask yourself why Dad suddenly thinks she can't count.' When a man who manages other people's money for a living tells you his own mother is confused about numbers, you should wonder whose numbers he's really worried about. The night before the meeting, I lay on my couch with Roscoe on my chest and Clementine wedged between my hip and the cushion. The apartment was quiet. The fridge hummed. A car passed on the road outside, its headlights dragging a slow rectangle of light across the ceiling. I thought about calling Martin and telling him I'd changed my mind. I thought about calling my father and saying, "Forget it, keep the money, keep the farmland, keep the story you've been telling yourself for 12 years. I thought about how much easier it would be to go back to being the daughter who never asked for anything. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about confrontation. The hardest part isn't the anger. The hardest part is the doubt that comes the night before. When the house is dark, and the cats are warm, and a small voice in your head says, "Maybe you're the one tearing this family apart." My grandfather used to say something I didn't understand until that Friday night. He'd say it when a storm was coming, and the soybeans needed covering and nobody wanted to go out in the wind. "The truth doesn't break a family," he'd say. "The lie does. The truth just shows you where it was already broken." At 11:14, I checked the clock. My phone lit up. Brooke. My sister almost never called me. She texted sometimes, short messages, "Hey," or "Mom says hi," or a photo of something she'd designed. But calls were for emergencies and Christmas. "Addie?" Her voice was small, younger than 28. Did Dad really change Grandpa's will? I sat up. Roscoe slid off my chest and landed on the cushion with an annoyed chirp. "Come to Martin's office tomorrow," I said. "You'll see everything." I didn't know. She was crying. Not loud. The kind of crying that lives in the throat and barely makes it out. I swear I didn't know. I thought he just wanted to take care of both of us. I thought it was equal. "I know you didn't know, Brooke. Are you angry at me?" "No. That's why I'm not angry at you." She hung up. I stayed on the couch. Roscoe repositioned himself on my lap, and Clementine purred against my ribs, a low vibration like a motor idling. They didn't know what was happening tomorrow. They just knew I was home. I woke at 5:30, fed the cats, made coffee in the dark kitchen with the overhead light off, because the blue-gray light through the window was enough, and I didn't want to disturb the quiet. I showered, dressed. Not fancy, not casual. The navy blouse I'd worn to my first job interview at the veterinary clinic 7 years ago, and a pair of clean khaki pants with a crease I'd ironed the night before. Clothes that said, "I came here to be taken seriously, and I will leave the same way." I drove through town at 7:30, an hour and a half early, because being early is what you do when you've spent your whole life being the one nobody waits for. The morning was sharp. First real frost on the grass, the kind that crunches when you step on it and melts by 9. Fog sat in the low spots along the road. The donut shop on Main Street had its lights on, and the American flag in front of the post office hung flat because there was no wind. Martin's garage office was open when I arrived at 9:30. He'd set up 6 chairs around his desk, arranged in a semicircle, 2 folders on the table, a pitcher of water and paper cups. No flowers, no formalities. The room looked the way a room looks when something important is about to happen and nobody is pretending otherwise. "You ready?" he asked. "No, but that's never been a reason not to show up." He smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile, and it looked exactly the way my grandfather's smile looked in the walleye photograph, lopsided, brief, and a little sad. I sat in the chair closest to the window. Outside, the gravel parking lot was empty. A sparrow was sitting on the mailbox. The clock on Martin's wall, an old battery-powered thing with a crack in the glass, read 9:41. At 9:47, I heard a car pull into the lot. The gravel shifted under the tires. That specific sound of small stones grinding against each other, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times in the clinic parking lot but never paid attention to until now. I didn't turn around. I knew the sound of my father's engine. I'd been listening to it pull into driveways and pull out of parking lots my entire life. It had never sounded louder than it did that morning. My father walked in first. He was wearing a suit, charcoal, pressed, the suit he wore to bank functions and funeral viewings. He'd shaved. His jaw was tight. He nodded at Martin the way men nod at each other when they don't want to be the first to speak. My mother came in behind him. Her eyes were swollen. She'd been crying. Not that morning, but recently. The way eyes look when they've been crying for days and have only stopped long enough to drive somewhere. She sat in the chair farthest from my father. I'd never seen her do that before. Brooke was last. She slipped in like a person entering a room they're not sure they belong in. No eye contact. She chose the chair in the corner, near the filing cabinet, and she sat with her hands between her knees. Then the door opened again, and Aunt Marge walked in with Uncle Roy. I hadn't expected them, and from the look on my father's face, neither had he. "If this is about my father's estate," Marge said, pulling a chair from against the wall, "I have a right to be here. Roy, too." Roy nodded once and sat down. He was a big man, a retired electrician, and his presence in the small garage office made the room feel like it had lost a third of its oxygen. Marge had something in her hand, a manila envelope, sealed with masking tape across the flap. Written on the front, in my grandmother's careful handwriting. For Martin. To be opened in the presence of all. My father saw it. His eyes stayed on it a beat too long. "Mom sent something?" he asked. "She did," Marge said. Martin stood. He didn't clear his throat or tap a pen or any of the things people do when they're about to start something they wish they didn't have to. He just stood, and the room went quiet. "I called this meeting to review irregularities in the estate of Harold James Sutton, deceased March 2014. Everything discussed today is documented. I'm going to walk through the material, and when I'm finished, everyone here will have the opportunity to respond." My father sat straight in his chair. He was a man who managed money for a living. He knew what documented meant. He knew what was coming. And for the first time in 12 years, he couldn't redirect, couldn't defer, couldn't tell anyone that Adeline preferred to handle things on her own. Martin placed 2 documents side by side on the desk, facing outward so everyone could read them. The original will on the left, the amended version on the right. "This," he said, touching the left page, "is the will Harold Sutton executed in my office in 2012, with 2 witnesses and a notary. It names Adeline Sutton as primary beneficiary of approximately 70% of his estate, the family home, 47 acres of farmland, and the entirety of his credit union savings account." He moved to the right page. "This is the will filed with the county after Harold's death in 2014. It was prepared by a different attorney. It redistributes the estate, 50% to Glenn Sutton, 30% to Brooke Sutton, and 20% to Adeline Sutton, held in trust and managed by Glenn Sutton." Diane leaned forward. "I've never seen the first one." Glenn said nothing. Martin opened the first folder. "Credit union statements for the savings account Harold left. Balance at the time of death, $142,000. He laid the pages out in sequence, each withdrawal highlighted in yellow. Within 18 months, the account was empty. Every withdrawal bears a single authorized signature. He didn't say whose. He didn't have to. The signature was on every page. Brooke pressed her hand to her mouth. Martin opened the second folder. In 2017, the 47 acres of farmland east of Route 9 were sold. Sale price, $198,000. Proceeds deposited into a personal account. He placed the deed transfer on the desk. No family member was notified. The wall clock ticked. Nobody moved. Marge had her arms crossed. Roy sat with his hands flat on his thighs. My mother was staring at the bank statements the way a person stares at a car accident they just realized involved someone they know. "The original will," Martin said, "named Adeline Sutton as the primary beneficiary of approximately $266,000 in combined assets. The amended will redirected those assets without her knowledge or consent." Glenn's voice, when it came, was flat, practiced. "This was my father's estate. I had a right to manage it." Martin looked at him over his glasses. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. "You had a right to manage it honestly, Glenn. not to take it. The clock ticked 3 more times before anyone breathed. Then Martin picked up Marge's envelope, the one sealed with masking tape, the one my grandmother had labeled in blue ink. He opened it carefully, the way you open something from a person who took care with it. Inside were 2 things: a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper and a single photocopied document. Martin read the letter aloud. My grandmother's voice came through his. Not literally, but in the rhythm, the precision, the refusal to waste a word. To my family, he read, I have kept silent for 12 years, not out of weakness, but out of preparation. Glenn, you are my son, and I love you. But you took from your daughter what your father wanted her to have. I cannot change what you did, but I can make sure the record is complete. He turned the page. I will not be present today because my body does not cooperate with my wishes, but my memory does. And my memory has a better track record than some people's honesty. Marge let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Roy put his hand on her knee. Martin set down the letter and held up the second document. This is a life insurance policy issued in 2010 by a credit union your father was not associated with. The beneficiary is Adeline Sutton. The death benefit is $85,000. It was never claimed after Harold's death. Glenn looked up. I didn't know about that. No, Martin said. You didn't. Because your mother was the one who suggested it to Harold. She opened the policy at a separate institution specifically because she didn't trust what might happen to assets held where you had signing authority. The room absorbed that. My grandmother, 87 years old, recovering from a stroke, dependent on her son for rides to the doctor, had been building a parallel set of books for over a decade. She'd watched. She'd waited. She'd kept her own ledger in a drawer nobody thought to open, and when the numbers finally needed to be read aloud, she sent them in a sealed envelope with masking tape and blue ink. I looked at the letter on the desk. Her handwriting, small, neat. Every letter formed the way a woman who'd balanced 40 years of corporate accounts would form a letter. No crossouts, no corrections. My grandma had spent 12 years building a case the way she'd spent her whole career balancing books, one line at a time. No errors, no shortcuts. My father took off his suit jacket. He folded it once, placed it on the back of his chair, and loosened his tie. Then he pulled the tie off entirely and set it on the desk, where it lay coiled on the wood like a question nobody wanted to answer. I made a mistake, he said. His voice cracked on the second word. Not dramatically, not the way people crack in movies, with a hand over the mouth and a sudden collapse. Just a hairline fracture in the word made, the kind of crack that tells you the foundation has been shifting for years, and this is the first time the wall shows it. I took the money because I thought I could grow it. I found a development opportunity in 2015, a mixed-use project upstate. Commercial on the ground floor, apartments above. I put in $160,000. He paused. I lost almost all of it. The developer filed for bankruptcy. The project was never built. Diane put both hands on the table. You never told me. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell anyone. I told myself I'd fix it. Sell the farmland, reinvest, earn it back. I sold the 47 acres and put the money into a different fund. That one didn't collapse, but it didn't grow either. And by then the money was gone, and the land was gone, and I didn't know how to say any of that out loud. He looked at me. I told myself you didn't need it. You had your job, your apartment, your life. You were doing fine. His eyes were wet. You were always doing fine, Adeline, and I let myself believe that meant you didn't need what was yours. I looked at my father. Not the bank manager. Not the man who forgot to sign my financial aid form. The man who taught me to ride a bicycle in the driveway when I was 6, holding the back of the seat with one hand and waving with the other when he let go. The man who came to my vet tech graduation, even if he sat in the back row. For a moment, one long, airless moment, I thought about letting it go. Maybe the money didn't matter. Maybe peace was worth more than $266,000. But then I remembered the party, 200 people, and they ran out of space for me. Dad, I said. I hadn't planned the words. They came the way diagnoses come after you've read the chart 3 times. Clear, unavoidable, and too late to undo. I believe you're sorry. I believe you were scared. But you didn't just take money. I looked at the bank statements on Martin's desk, at the highlighted withdrawals, at the deed transfer, at my grandmother's letter. You took 12 years of my life where I thought my family didn't think I was worth including. Every birthday party I wasn't invited to. Every family vacation I wasn't told about. Every time Mom said we ran out of space. You let that happen. Because if you included me, you'd have to look at me and remember what you did. The room was silent. Diane was crying. Marge was staring at Glenn with an expression I couldn't name, something between pity and fury. You didn't just steal an inheritance, Dad. You stole the story of who I was in this family. You made me the daughter who didn't need anything, because needing something from you would have meant you had to explain why you couldn't give it. You rewrote the narrative, and I believed it. Brooke's head was down. Her shoulders were shaking. You turned Adeline as independent into a family policy so you'd never have to say, I owe Adeline a debt I can't repay. I stopped. I hadn't raised my voice. I'd spoken the way my grandmother spoke, the way Martin spoke, flat, factual, the weight carried by the content, not the volume. Then I turned to Martin. What are the options? He laid them out in a row, the way he'd laid out the documents. Neat, orderly, no ambiguity. Option 1, legal action. I could file a formal complaint for breach of fiduciary duty. Option 2, a mediated settlement. Glenn repays what he took, over time, with documentation. Option 3, a family agreement, drawn up by Martin, signed by all parties. I don't want to sue my father, I said. I looked at Glenn. He was staring at the table, at the tie he'd taken off, at the pen with my grandfather's initials that Martin had placed beside the folders. But I want every cent accounted for, in writing, with a repayment plan. Glenn looked at me. His eyes were red and his hands were flat on his thighs. He looked at me like he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in 12 years. If you've ever sat at a family table where your chair was the one that didn't quite fit, the one they borrowed from the other room, or the one they forgot to set a plate for, you know what it feels like to be included as an afterthought. I didn't tell this story to punish my father. I told it because sometimes the only way to be seen is to stop being invisible on purpose. If this story is hitting close to home, leave a comment. I read everyone. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. These stories come from real places, and they're not going anywhere. My mother spoke next. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, not a tissue, not a napkin, just the bare palm, the way women do when they don't care anymore who sees. She turned to my father. You told me Adeline didn't want to come to the party. Her voice was low and uneven, like a road that had been paved over one too many times. You said she was busy. You said she preferred to be alone. Glenn opened his mouth. How many times? Diane said. How many times did you tell me she preferred to be alone? He didn't answer. I asked her to drive 6 hours to drop off Brooke at art camp, and she did it, Diane said. I asked her to sign up for the family photo, and she did. I asked her to come to Thanksgiving, and she came every single year and sat at the end of the table and never once complained. Her voice broke. And every time I told her we ran out of space, it was because you told me she didn't mind. She turned to me. Her mascara had smeared into 2 dark lines under her eyes, and she didn't fix them. I believed him, Adeline. Every time. I believed him because it was easier than asking you directly. She swallowed. I am so sorry. I know, Mom. From now on, I ask you, not him. Not through Brooke. Not through anyone. I call you, and I ask you, and I listen to what you say. She put her hand on the desk, palm up, like she was offering something she couldn't name. I should have been doing that all along. Marge nodded. I think we all should have. Roy, who hadn't spoken the entire meeting, looked at Glenn and said, in a voice like gravel settling, Harold would have hated this. Then he looked at me. But he would have been proud of you. My mother reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Her palm was damp from crying. She held on the way you hold something you almost dropped and caught at the very last second. Tight, grateful, a little bit shaking. I let her hold it. Martin had prepared the agreement before we arrived. He'd told me he would, and he had. A single document, 4 pages, clear language, no jargon. The terms were written the way my grandmother would have written them. Specific, numbered, impossible to misunderstand. Glenn Sutton would repay Adeline Sutton a total of $312,000, the original inheritance of $266,000, plus accrued interest, over a period of 7 years. Payments would be monthly, documented, and reviewed quarterly by an independent accountant. If Glenn defaulted on 3 consecutive payments, Adeline retained the right to pursue full civil litigation. The life insurance policy of $85,000 would be claimed immediately. Martin had already prepared the forms. As partial compensation for the farmland that could no longer be returned, Glenn would assign Adeline co-ownership of the family home on Birch Lane, my grandmother's house, effective upon Edith's passing. Martin placed the agreement on the desk. Then he placed something else beside it. Harold's pen. The one with the initials engraved on the barrel. The one Martin had kept for 12 years in a drawer that smelled like pine and old paper. "This was your father's pen," Martin said to Glenn. "He used it to sign the original will. It seems fitting." Glenn picked up the pen. His hand was shaking, but not the way a hand shakes from cold or from fear. It shook the way a hand shakes when the body is trying to do something the mind hasn't fully agreed to yet. He signed. Diane watched him sign. Brooke watched him sign. Marge and Roy watched him sign. Martin witnessed. I watched. When he put the pen down, I reached into the bag I'd brought with me and pulled out a tin of lemon cookies. My grandmother's recipe. The ones with the extra zest. I'd baked them at 5:30 that morning. The way she'd taught me, measuring everything by weight, not volume, because weight doesn't lie. I set the tin on the desk, between the legal agreement and the manila folders. "Grandma wanted me to bring these," I said. "We sat in that converted garage, eating lemon cookies and signing legal documents. And for the first time in 12 years, every number in my family's ledger added up. They left one by one. Brooke first, without saying goodbye to our father but touching my shoulder as she passed. Diane next, keys in her hand, eyes still swollen, driving separately from Glenn for the first time I could remember. Marge and Roy together. Roy held the door for Marge the way he always did, one hand on the small of her back, and Marge carried the leftover lemon cookies in a napkin. Glenn was the last to stand. He looked at Martin. Then he looked at me. He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked out. The gravel crunched under his shoes, slow, uneven, like a man walking a road he didn't recognize anymore. The garage was quiet. Martin gathered the folders, stacked them, placed them in the filing cabinet beside the walleye photograph. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had done this kind of work for 40 years and understood that the ceremony was over and the paperwork was what mattered now. "Your grandfather would have been proud," he said. "He would have been sad it was necessary." Martin looked at me over his glasses. Yes, he would have. But he planned for it anyway. That's the kind of man he was. He told me something then that I carry with me still. He said Harold talked about me constantly in the last years of his life, when they went fishing, when they sat on the porch, when they drove to the hardware store for things neither of them needed. He said you were the only one in the family who knew the difference between being strong and being stubborn. He said stubborn people hold on to everything. Strong people let go of what they have to. I stood in the doorway. The morning had burned off the frost, and the gravel lot was bright with October sun. A crow sat on the fence across the road. "I miss him," I said. "He knew you would. That's why he planned for it." I drove home the long way, past the field where the farmland used to be. Somebody had built a gas station on it. One of those small ones with 2 pumps and a convenience store that sold beef jerky and lottery tickets. I pulled in, filled my tank, and bought a pack of peppermints. The receipt cost more than my grandfather's pen. but the pen was worth more than the field. I went to see my grandmother that afternoon. The lavender along her front steps was still green, despite the frost. It was the hardy kind, the kind that didn't give up until December. She was sitting on the porch in her rocking chair with a blanket over her knees and a cup of tea balanced on the arm. "Did he sign?" she asked before I'd reached the top step. "He signed." She nodded once. Then she took a sip of her tea. I sat in the other chair, the wooden one without the rocker, the one my grandfather used to sit in with the newspaper. Nobody had moved it since he died. The wood was soft and gray from weather, and it creaked when I shifted my weight, and it was the most comfortable chair I'd ever sat in. I told her everything. The room, the documents, the letter. Martin reading her words aloud. My father's face when the life insurance policy appeared. Diane's tears. Brooke's silence. Roy's voice, heavy and final, saying Harold would have hated this but would have been proud. My grandmother listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, without nodding, without any of the small, encouraging sounds people make when they're more interested in being seen listening than in actually hearing. She just sat and rocked. And when I was finished, she closed her eyes for a long time. "I didn't want to hurt him," she said. "I wanted him to stop hurting you." She opened her eyes. "There's a difference." "He cried, Grandma." "I know. He cried when he was 8 and broke a window, too. Crying doesn't mean he's wrong to pay for it." I told her about the settlement. Every cent repaid over 7 years. The life insurance claimed. The house co-ownership. "What will you do with the insurance money?" she asked. "I'm going to fix your roof. It's been leaking since 2019. She laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that showed her back teeth and made her shoulders shake. I hadn't heard her laugh like that in years. "Your grandfather always said you'd fix things," she said. "He just didn't think you'd have to fix the family first." She reached for another lemon cookie from the tin I'd left on the porch railing. She ate it slowly, the way she did everything, deliberately, with her eyes half closed, like she was checking the recipe against memory. 6 months later, the checks started arriving on time. My father mailed them. Actual checks, paper, in envelopes with return addresses printed in the upper left corner. He could have set up a bank transfer. He chose to write them by hand. I didn't ask why. I thought I knew. Some debts require the weight of a pen. He was quieter at family gatherings. Not absent. He came to everyone. Thanksgiving. Christmas. Brooke's birthday, which was not a surprise party that year but a dinner at a restaurant where everyone was invited and everyone's name was on the reservation. He brought dessert each time, store-bought pie, the kind with the plastic dome lid. He set it on the table without ceremony and sat down and didn't try to lead the conversation the way he used to. My mother called me every Sunday evening. She asked about my cats. She asked about the clinic. She asked if I'd read anything good lately. Small questions, weekly questions, the kind of questions that don't seem like much individually but add up to something over time, the same way pennies add up if you don't throw them away. Brooke sent me something in the mail 3 months after the meeting. A card, handmade. She'd drawn the front herself. A small watercolor of 2 cats sitting on a kitchen table, one gray, one orange. The pens she'd used were the ones I'd given her for her birthday. The ones from the drugstore on Route 12. Inside, in her own handwriting, "I'm sorry I never noticed. I'm learning to." I put the card on my fridge, next to a photo of my grandfather holding a walleye and a photo of my grandmother on her porch. The insurance money came through in January. I used part of it to fix Grandma Edith's roof. 3 days of work by a crew from town, new shingles, new flashing around the chimney. Part of it went to a down payment on a used pickup truck because my Honda was 12 years old and burned oil on hills. And $5,000 went to the animal shelter where I'd adopted Roscoe and Clementine, because some debts are owed to the places that gave you what you needed before you knew you needed it. I didn't get a party with 200 people. I got something different. A family that finally counted me in. A few weeks after the roof was finished, I was helping my grandmother reorganize her front room. She'd decided to move her bedroom downstairs. The stairs were getting harder, and she was practical enough to admit it before anyone had to suggest it. So we carried boxes and rearranged furniture and argued about where to put the bookshelf, which she wanted by the window and I wanted against the interior wall because the window leaked cold air in February. She won. She always did. In the bottom drawer of her writing desk, the one with the brass handles she polished every spring, I found a ledger. Not a financial one. Not the kind she'd kept at the lumber company. This one was smaller, cloth-bound, with a green cover that had gone soft at the corners from years of handling. I opened it. The first page had dates going back to when I was 7 years old. Birthdays, holidays, visits, and next to each entry, a note. Not about money, about me. Adeline fixed the kitchen faucet. No one asked her. Adeline drove Edith to the eye doctor, brought lemon cookies. Adeline sent birthday card to Brooke, postmarked 1 day early. Adeline called Sunday, asked about the garden. Adeline came to Thanksgiving, sat at the end, stayed for dishes. Page after page. 2 full pages at the end, the handwriting a little shakier but still legible, still precise. A list titled, "In my grandmother's neat blue ink, things Adeline has done without being asked." The last line was written in red ink, the only red ink in the entire ledger. A single sentence, underlined once. She never asked for anything. That is why she deserves everything. I closed the ledger. I placed it back in the drawer, exactly where I'd found it, because it was hers, and some records belonged to the person who kept them. Then I walked out to the porch and sat in my grandfather's chair. The lavender was still blooming. The roof no longer leaked. And somewhere inside the house, my grandmother was humming a song I hadn't heard since I was 6 years old. The one she used to hum while teaching me to count. If you're still here, thank you. This story came from a place I don't visit often, but I think some of you know that place too. If you grew up being the one who was supposed to be fine, the one who didn't need anything, the one who was always doing great on her own, I see you. You matter. Your name belongs on the list. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And check the description below for more stories like this one. I'll see you in the next one.